The day started like a victory lap. I had just flown back from Paris, still riding the quiet high that comes after a win you've been chasing for years. 3 years of follow-ups, tastings, missed holidays, and polite rejections had finally paid off. Valente Vineyards was officially stepping into 5-star hotels and elite dining rooms across Europe. It wasn't just a deal, it was a door I'd forced open inch by inch. I was still in the same navy suit I'd worn through airport lounges, stone cellars, and boardrooms that smelled faintly of oak and ambition. My heels were scuffed from endless walking, my carry-on thudding along behind me like it had its own exhaustion. I barely noticed any of it as I pushed through the office doors, already rehearsing a speech in my head. Champagne in the break room, a toast to the team, a moment to let everyone feel what global actually meant. Instead, the office felt wrong, silent, hollow. My assistant's desk was empty, her chair pushed in too neatly, her monitor dark. That alone should have stopped me, but I brushed it aside. People run late, mornings blur. I kept walking, heart still humming with momentum, until I reached my office. That's when I saw it. A plain white envelope centered on my desk, my name written in thick, confident strokes. I didn't need to turn it over. I knew that handwriting the way you know a scar on your own body. My father. I opened it slowly, more tired than nervous, my hands steady out of habit. Inside was a formal letter, crisp and impersonal, stamped with authority. Lupa Valente has been appointed Chief Executive Officer of Valente Vineyards, effective immediately. The rest blurred into legal language and signatures, but my eyes kept circling his name, Luca. My younger brother. I stood there longer than I realized, still holding the paper, still wearing my coat, like if I didn't move, none of it could be real. Luca. The same Luca who once tried to launch a kombucha brand and landed himself hospitalized with a mold infection. The Luca who laughed through a New Year's tasting and called our Syra vinegar. The Luca who never showed up for harvest, never stayed through blending, never sat through the meetings where real decisions were made. Yet somehow he had arrived right on time for the crown. I walked to the window and stared out at the vineyard stretching into the distance. Our vineyard. My vineyard. I remembered the first year I took over, when the rows were uneven and half neglected, when the finances were a mess and the name Valente barely carried weight outside the county. Back then, it was a relic, a family obligation people smiled politely about. I had rebuilt it vine by vine, decision by decision. I learned soil chemistry, hired specialists, burned bridges, courted critics, and made the brand mean something. I gave it my 20s, most of my 30s, my marriage, and every soft plan I ever had for a different kind of life. And now, Luca was in charge. My legs finally gave up their act, and I sat down, slow and heavy, like my body had just caught up with the truth. I opened the drawer and pulled out my private ledger, then the slim folder of top-tier contacts I kept separate from company records. Clients I'd brought in personally, relationships built on trust, not logos. I placed both in my leather tote, zipped it closed, and stood again. I didn't make a scene, I didn't write a note or look for an explanation. I walked out, got into my car, and started the engine. This wasn't losing, it was the first step towards something else entirely. Luca just didn't know it yet. The days that followed blurred into something quieter. I retreated to a small cabin in Carmel Valley, tucked between old oaks and rolling vineyards that looked like green velvet laid over the hills. It wasn't a getaway so much as a forgotten corner of my life, a restoration project I'd helped secure years ago. No cell service worth mentioning, no neighbors, no expectations. Mornings started with bare feet on cold floors, strong coffee in my hands, and fog drifting through the valley like it had nowhere else to be. I walked the same dirt trail every day, past neglected Chardonnay vines leaning at odd angles, imperfect and unpolished. I liked them that way. My phone rang until it didn't. Calls from the office, from my mother, from people suddenly realizing what they'd done. I silenced it all and left the phone in a drawer. At night, I sat on the porch with a glass of the 2019 Reserve, the one named after my grandfather, and let the stars fill the space where pressure used to live. I didn't rage. I didn't fall apart. I remembered, and I planned. When my mother finally called with her syrupy invitation to a family tasting dinner, I agreed without emotion. I went to see the cracks forming. The estate house was polished to perfection, candles flickering, Luca seated at the head like a man playing a role he didn't understand. I watched them nod, applaud, celebrate ideas they didn't grasp. And when I spoke, calmly and precisely, the room went still. Truth has weight when it's delivered without anger. I left before they could recover, stepping into the cold air without slamming a single door. After that, the calls changed. They came quietly, privately, from people who remembered who built what. I listened, but I didn't rush. I opened a notebook and began listing names, favors, expiring contracts, leverage earned the hard way. It wasn't revenge, it was inventory. One afternoon, I met the COO of a rival label in town, someone sharp enough to know what I was worth without me explaining it. He listened. He nodded. He slid a folder across the table. This would be your team, your territory, your call. We'll match your old comp and offer equity. I studied the papers without touching them. The offer was clean, tempting, respectful, but it wasn't mine. I appreciate it, I said, meeting his eyes. I really do, but I'm not ready to join someone else's empire. He smiled like he'd expected that. Well, if you change your mind, he said, standing, just know the door's wide open. I walked out into the late afternoon sun and sat in my car for a while. I could have jumped ship, started over, made money, but I wasn't doing this for money. I was doing this because someone tried to erase me from the very thing I had built, because they underestimated what a woman with a plan and patience could do. This wasn't exile. This was a power delay, and when I came back, I wouldn't be asking for permission. I'd be defining the terms. Not to return as the prodigal daughter, but as the architect they couldn't replace. It started with a smell. Warm empanadas, her signature ones, stuffed with beef and olives and raisins. My mother never cooked unless she needed something. She called it tradition. I called it bait. I showed up anyway. I wanted her to look me in the eye. The house smelled like nostalgia. The kitchen was clean, too clean, like it had been scrubbed twice for good measure. She wore an apron she hadn't touched in years. Her makeup was subtle, her tone gentle, but her eyes darted like she was bracing for impact. "Sit," she said, motioning to the old wooden stool. I made too many. I took one, broke it in half, let the steam rise before I spoke. "You didn't ask me here just to eat." She gave a tight smile. "No, but I figured you'd listen better if you weren't hungry." I waited. "Luca's struggling a bit," she said finally. "There's a lot on his plate. He wasn't ready." I raised my eyebrows. "And who decided he was?" She winced. "Your father thought—" "I didn't ask about him." The room went quiet. She folded a dish towel slowly, deliberately. "He's in over his head. We can all see that now, and we need you back just to stabilize things. Quietly behind the scenes." There it was. I set down the half-eaten empanada and looked her dead in the eye. "I don't do quiet anymore, or behind the scenes." She flinched. "If I come back," I said, "it's on my terms." She didn't speak, so I continued. 35% equity, co-CEO title. Luca steps down publicly. He can stay on as brand ambassador if he wants to post selfies with wine barrels. "That's a lot," she said, voice trembling. "It's fair," I replied, "and it's non-negotiable." She took a breath. "Your father won't go for this. Then he can watch the company drown, because I'm not here to patch holes anymore. I'm here to own the damn ship." She turned toward the sink, pretending to rinse a glass that was already clean. "Dana," she said finally, "don't do this to him." "I'm not doing anything to him," I said calmly. "He did this to himself, and you helped." I stood, wiped my hands on the napkin she'd folded too neatly, and walked toward the door. "If you want me back, those are the terms. There's no negotiation, just a decision." I paused at the threshold. The smell of warm pastry clung to my coat. "When you're ready to lead with sense instead of sentiment," I added, "you know how to reach me." She didn't try to stop me. didn't plead. She just stood there, shoulders stiff, her silence hanging in the kitchen like a signed contract. And for the first time, I knew she understood. I wasn't coming back to ask. I was coming back to rule. They chose neutral ground, a sleek Napa tasting salon with floor-to-ceiling windows and soft jazz humming through the speakers. It was the kind of place you booked when you wanted to feel civilized while negotiating bloodlines. I arrived exactly on time, not early, not late, just enough to remind them I wasn't there to impress anyone. My mother sat near the center of the table, flanked by Luca and my father. All three of them looked up when I walked in, like I was stepping onto a stage I hadn't asked for. "Dana," my mother said gently. Her tone was cautious, practiced. I nodded, sat down, and without a word, slid a folder across the table. Luca reached for it like a curious child. Inside were the terms: typed, clear, direct. Co-CEO title, 35% equity, full veto authority. Luca reassigned to brand ambassador with no operational control. Luca's face tightened as he read. My mother glanced at my father, who hadn't said a word yet. He just stared at the table, fingers interlaced, jaw locked. "You expect us to agree to this?" Luca asked, trying to laugh. "You're trying to gut me in front of the whole industry." "No, Luca," I said, meeting his eyes. "You did that yourself when you turned Valente into a joke with hashtags and kombucha tastings." He flinched. My mother started to speak, but I held up a hand. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here because I was invited. You wanted a solution. This is the solution." Luca looked at my father, who still hadn't looked up. "Dad," he said, voice cracking, "say something." The old man shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. "I told you this would happen," he said, finally. His voice was gravel. "You weren't ready." Luca's mouth dropped open. "You said I deserved a shot." "I gave you a shot," he said. "Dana gave you a lifeline." He looked at me then for the first time. "You built this," he said, quiet. "I didn't want to admit it, but the numbers, they don't lie." Luca stood suddenly, hands on the table. "So that's it? You're just going to give her everything back?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm not asking for what I had. I'm taking what I earned." Luca's hands curled into fists, but he didn't speak. His silence was the sound of surrender. My mother finally broke. "He's overwhelmed, Dana. He's young. He made mistakes." "We all make mistakes," I said, standing. "It's what you do after that matters." I gathered the folder and handed them a signed copy. "You have 48 hours to finalize. If not, the competitors calling me will get a very detailed breakdown of what's going wrong at Valente Vineyards." I smiled. Not a threat, not a bluff, just facts. As I turned to leave, Luca muttered behind me, "What am I supposed to do now?" I paused. "Be the face," I said over my shoulder. "Smile for the cameras. Pose in front of the barrels. You're good at that." Then I walked out into the crisp Napa air, my heels clicking against the stone path. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt justified. They'd spent months pretending they could replace me. Now they knew the truth. You can't replace the foundation without bringing down the whole house. The morning I walked back into Valente Vineyards, the fog was just starting to lift off the hills. The kind of morning that smelled like cold grapes and wet earth. The smell that reminded me why I loved this place in the first place. I didn't announce myself. I didn't need to. Word had already spread. As I stepped through the glass doors of the main office, heads turned. A few people stood, a few just froze. One of the harvest coordinators, Jessica, gave me a half smile and mouthed, "Thank God." I gave a nod back and kept walking. In the main conference room, most of the leadership team had already gathered, some out of curiosity, some out of nerves. Luca was there too, seated at the far end with his phone in his hand, tapping it like it might save him. I placed my folder on the table and took the seat at the head. "This won't take long," I said. The room went silent. First, I looked around the table. Luca will no longer be overseeing internal operations. He'll be moving into the new brand ambassador role, focused on media, outreach, and external partnerships. Luca looked like he wanted to protest but didn't. The memo had already gone out. This was just ceremony. Now, second, I continued, we're refocusing our product strategy back to what made us valuable: heritage, quality, exclusivity. The wellness trend is over. No more chasing zero alcohol lines or TikTok tastings. A murmur of approval moved through the room like wind through vines. Third, and most important, we rebuild trust, not just with our clients, but with each other. Transparency, accountability, and actual expertise are back on the table. I paused. Let that sink in. This isn't a reset, I said. This is a course correction. One of the logistics managers, Luis, raised his hand. So, you're really back? I looked at him. I never left. Not really. Lucas stood then, awkward and stiff, trying to reclaim some part of the spotlight. I just want to say, he began, I'm proud of what Dana built, and I'm here to support her. It sounded rehearsed, maybe coached, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. He was stepping aside, and everyone saw it. I nodded once and turned to the staff. Let's get back to work. The meeting ended quietly, efficiently. No fanfare, no applause. But as I walked out, I caught the eyes of the people who had watched me carry this place on my back for a decade. There was no doubt left in their faces. Dana Valente was back, and this time no one dared question it. I didn't need to prove I was the leader anymore. I just was. 2 months later, I sat on the hilltop terrace that overlooked the entire vineyard, a glass of the new vintage in my hand. The sun was just starting to dip behind the Santa Ian Mountains, casting long shadows over the rows of vines we'd just finished pruning. The fields looked cleaner now, straighter, reclaimed. From up here, I could see everything. The processing barn, the new visitor center we'd finally greenlit, the gravel roads winding like veins through the valley. It was all alive again, not flashy, not loud, just precise, like it used to be. The numbers had come in that morning, a record-breaking quarter, sales up, press coverage glowing, distributors re-signing. The fallout from Luca's influencer era had all but evaporated, replaced by a quiet surge in credibility. Clients trusted us again. I sipped slowly, letting the oak finish sit on my tongue. My phone buzzed beside me. I picked it up without much thought. It was a text from my mother. Sunday dinner, just us. No meetings, no agenda, just family. I stared at it for a long second, thumb hovering. Then I smiled. Not the tight smile I used for negotiations or the strained one from board meetings. A real one. One that said, this time I believe you. Because I knew it wasn't a trap. They'd stopped trying to bait me, stopped testing my resolve. The message wasn't about pulling me back into the old roles. It wasn't about guilt or manipulation. It was peace. I typed back, sounds good, I'll bring wine. No need for formality anymore. I put the phone down and leaned back in the chair, letting the wind pull stray strands of hair from my ponytail. The vines below rustled gently, swaying like they had secrets of their own. I thought about all the versions of myself that had stood in this exact spot. The desperate one who begged for budget approvals, the furious one who watched her legacy slip through her fingers, the heartbroken one who walked away without a scene, and now this version, calm, rooted, no longer fighting to be seen. I didn't think about Luca. I didn't need to. He was doing fine in his new role, smiling for cameras, shaking hands at events, throwing around hashtags like confetti. He wasn't built for vision, but he was great for photos, and for once, he knew it. The sun kissed the edge of the hills, setting the fields aglow in a deep amber. I lifted my glass to the sky, not to toast a victory, to acknowledge it quietly without needing witnesses, because the silence I had once clung to in grief and anger was different now. This silence was ownership, not of the land, not of the brand, of myself, and no one could take that away.